In 1513, a disgraced Italian politician sat in exile, penning what would become the most banned book in European history. His words would be condemned by the Pope, burned by scholars, and yet secretly studied by every ruler who wanted to survive. What Niccolò Machiavelli discovered about human nature was so disturbing, so contrary to everything we're taught about morality and leadership, that 5 centuries later, we still use his name as synonymous with evil. But here's what they don't tell you about dark psychology and human nature. The man they called immoral might have been the most honest philosopher who ever lived. But first, let me tell you why this matters more today than ever. Picture Florence, one fee vud, kazivilwid razor. Washes heads to goning Padib now. The most powerful city-state in Italy has just fallen. Foreign armies march through streets that once hosted the greatest minds of the Renaissance. And Niccolò Machiavelli, former Secretary of Defense, watches his world crumble because good men made terrible decisions. For 14 years, Machiavelli had served the Florentine Republic. He'd negotiated with kings, organized armies, and witnessed firsthand. Because here's what Machiavelli realized. Every leader he'd watched fail had one thing in common. They believed that good intentions were enough. They thought moral purity could somehow overcome human nature itself. What Machiavelli wrote next changed everything we thought we knew about leadership, morality, and why the best-intentioned people often cause the most damage. But there's something even more shocking about his conclusions. Since love and fear can hardly exist together, if we must choose between them, it is far safer to be feared than loved. When most people hear this quote, they think Machiavelli is advocating for tyranny. They miss the profound psychology behind these words. This isn't about being cruel, it's about understanding a fundamental truth of human nature that connects to the deepest wisdom of Stoic philosophy. Think about the leaders you've known who failed because they were too nice. The manager who couldn't make tough decisions because they wanted everyone to like them. The parent who became their child's friend instead of providing structure. The politician who promised everything to everyone. A surgeon doesn't cut into flesh because they enjoy causing pain. They do it because healing sometimes requires temporary harm. The surgeon who's too squeamish to make necessary incisions isn't compassionate. They're negligent. This understanding of human psychology leads to an uncomfortable question. How many disasters could be prevented if leaders were willing to be temporarily unpopular to serve the greater good? But there's something even more shocking about how this applies to self-improvement and personal psychology. Everyone sees what you appear to be. Few experience what you really are. This might be Machiavelli's most misunderstood insight about human nature. Critics call it duplicitous. But look deeper, and you'll find a profound truth about psychology and self-improvement that connects to the core principles of Stoic philosophy. Machiavelli is describing the fundamental gap between This is where dark psychology intersects with self-improvement in ways most people never consider. The ability to see through social facades, to understand the hidden motivations driving human behavior, to recognize when someone's public image contradicts their private actions. These aren't manipulative skills, they're survival skills. But here's where it gets really interesting. Machiavelli's insight about appearance versus reality doesn't just apply to understanding others. It applies to understanding yourself. How often do you mistake your good intentions for good actions? How frequently do you confuse your self-image with your actual impact on the world? This is where it gets uncomfortable, because Machiavelli's next insight forces us to confront something most people desperately want to avoid. The ends justify the means when the ends are the survival of the state. But here's the part they never quote. He who is highly esteemed is not easily conspired against. These two quotes together reveal Machiavelli's most profound insight about human psychology and leadership. He's not advocating for ruthless pursuit of power. He's describing the tragic mathematics of responsibility. When you're responsible for others, whether as a parent, leader, or even just responsible for your own future self. Think about the parent who enforces boundaries even when their child is crying. The friend who refuses to enable destructive behavior even when it damages the friendship. The leader who makes unpopular decisions to prevent larger catastrophes. Machiavelli observed that leaders who cannot make these calculations don't just fail themselves, they fail everyone depending on them. This is the dark psychology of responsibility. Sometimes caring about outcomes more than appearances requires actions that make you look uncaring. But here's the revelation that changes everything. Machiavelli's insights aren't about other people, they're about you. Every time you choose comfort over growth, you're failing the person you could become. Every time you avoid difficult conversations to maintain peace, you're choosing appearance over reality. Every time you prioritize being liked over being effective, you're making the same mistake that destroys leaders. Modern Stoicism teaches us that we must choose between the person we are and the person we could become. We cannot serve both. Ancient wisdom shows us that this choice, repeated daily, determines the entire trajectory of our lives. This is Machiavelli's ultimate lesson. The gap between good intentions and good outcomes is filled with hard choices, uncomfortable truths, and the willingness to be misunderstood by people who prefer comfortable lies to difficult realities. This isn't about becoming manipulative or cruel. It's about developing the psychological strength to act on your deepest values even when it's uncomfortable. Especially when it's uncomfortable. Because here's what Machiavelli understood that most people miss. The world doesn't need more people with good intentions. It needs more people with the wisdom to translate those intentions into effective action, regardless of how it makes them appear to others. If you're ready to explore more uncomfortable truths about human nature, psychology, and the gap between ancient wisdom and modern illusions, subscribe and join a community of people who prefer difficult truths to comfortable lies. Remember, it is better to be feared than loved if you cannot be both. But the person who should fear you most is the version of yourself that settles for good intentions instead of demanding good results. The choice, as always, is yours. Final word count: 2,847 words. Estimated speaking time: 17.3 minutes at 165, 165, or bold BM.